The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has defended his country's continued arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and that's despite the worsening humanitarian situation in Yemen. Johnson also stood by his government's decision to cut aid to war-torn Yemen by half, citing economic strains from the coronavirus pandemic. Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition Labour Party, slammed the decisions as unjustified. Starmer pointed out that the U.S., another major Saudi ally, has put a freeze on its kingdom, and it did so last month. Yemen has endured death and devastation since Saudi Arabia launched a war there in 2015. UN has already warned that the impoverished Arab nation is facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. However, an international donor conference earlier this week yielded less than half the money needed to prevent what the UN has said is a looming famine in the country. And now joining us is Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol, and Mr. Max Perry, geopolitical analyst, joining us out of New York. Gentlemen, welcome you. I'd like to welcome both of you to the show here. It's always a pleasure to have you both on. Tony, I guess since this relates to the UK, we're going to start with you there, bud. Your initial thoughts on this?
Well, isn't it an hypocrisy for Boris Johnson to be now reapproving arms sales to Saudi Arabia in the worst conflict in the world? Basically, the British government, via the arms lobbies, which are very powerful, like the Israel lobby and the pharmaceutical lobby, basically the British Parliament is owned by these people. They are basically managing to, I mean, you were talking about the risk of starvation. We're being told this week 16 million people in Yemen are at the risk of starvation. That country has been quite literally bombed back almost to the Stone Age by the Saudi Arabians, and there is Boris patting bin Salman on the back, the Saudi Arabians, and saying, well, it's all okay because we're making a lot of money. Now, the problem is here, we are, as British, with an ally there, supporting an absolutely appalling regime. And let's look at some of the proxies that the Saudis have been responsible for, not least of which, of course, is Osama bin Laden from the 9/11 fame. He, of course, was a Saudi, and almost all of the hijackers were Saudi citizens. Then there's ISIS, which the Saudi government has been supporting, and also with the Rohingya population. They have been being supported by the Saudis too. In fact, they've got what they've got, over in Myanmar is the Burmese being actually the government being supported by Israel, and the Rohingyas being supported by Saudi Arabia, and actually creating that conflict, those two countries. But these are working as Israel is a proxy for the United States. The Saudis are, in this case, a proxy for Britain. And we've got to look, I think, at some of the equipment, because 2/3 of the 100,000 deaths that we're now facing, plus now, that was last year, the British campaign against the arms trade reported that. We're looking at 2/3 of those deaths being created by the airstrikes, most of which are actually done with British equipment. We've got the British Typhoon jets, the British Tornado jets, the British Paveway bombs, the British Brimstone, and Storm Shadow missiles. And isn't it interesting that with the Brimstone missiles we British have been supplying, they're even using this fire and brimstone satanic devilish to describe the missiles they're selling to Mohammed bin Salman to destroy Yemen. So this is a really hypocritical, disgusting statement by Boris that really shows there's absolutely no morality and no credibility to British foreign policy. It's just all about making money, and it doesn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of people die in the process, it seems.
Thank you, Tony. And Max, I'd like to welcome to the program here. Now, Max, what's funny here is over the last, going on 6 years now, I've seen more, covering it right here on Press TV, I've seen more opposition out of the British Parliament with respect to the humanitarian issues, surrounding providing arms sales. It was providing arms to Riyadh and what they're doing with them in Yemen than we heard out of Congress in the States. I mean, there's some, but here are the states now under Joe Biden actually trying to pump the brakes with supplying the Saudis. But what the Brits are continuing to do it with that much opposition. It's still, like to Tony's point, they're putting the dollars before the morality. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I think from my perspective, I think that we're actually witnessing a slight rift between the United States and the UK as to how to rein in the Saudis while at the same time not throwing their strategic alliance and longstanding relationship in jeopardy. On the one hand, since the change of the administration in the U.S. which is conducting relations between the U.S. and the Saudis, where they've ostensibly pledged to end support for the military campaign against Yemen. The UK government is led by the Tories, is making it clear and sending a signal to the Biden administration that they're not going to follow the U.S.'s lead by not only continuing these arms sales, but they're even using their own incompetent mishandling of the pandemic to cut the humanitarian assistance, which Yemen desperately needs, in half. And so they're making I believe we're witnessing a slight rift here between the U.S. and the U.K. as to their policies towards the Saudis and their war on Yemen. I would also note, though, that the Biden administration itself has sent very mixed signals. They've undesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization, which has made it easier for the humanitarian aid to get to the long-suffering and many people. But at the same time, the humanitarian assistance they announced was actually a reduction from last year. It's under $200 million in humanitarian aid. So Biden himself has shown very mixed signals, and as we saw, he's also shown he's going back on his campaign pledge to punish Mohammed bin Salman. He's not placing any sanctions on MBS or the Saudi regime over the killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. So, but in regards to Yemen, it does seem like we're seeing a policy disagreement between the Western allies in regards to the Saudi regime.
And Tony, why is that? Why are we seeing a policy rift or possible? I mean, behind Riyadh stands Paris, London, and Washington. Why are we not seeing basically continuity to what we saw over the last 6 years between the three in supporting the Saudis with weapons? Go ahead.
Well, look, I mean, the British, I'm afraid, probably see the new Biden administration as a business opportunity. More money. And this is a way that these things have to be stopped, is by diplomatic agreements between respectable, not gangster nations, respectable nations, in order to stop the supply of arms and stop the spilling of innocent blood, which has been going on now for 5 years. It's the beginning of 2016 that this conflict started. And, I do believe that one of the main reasons for the Yemen conflict, people scratching their heads, why? This is the poorest country in the Middle East. Why would the Saudis see it as a threat? Well, historically, it's part of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Saudis are afraid that from this part of the Arabian Peninsula, there may be rebellions against the Saudi royal family. Nobody's ever elected them. So why are we actually, as democratic so-called countries, having alliances with these monarchical dictatorships? I find it absolutely incredible. 2,000 people a month dying there, and all Boris is seeing this as is a business opportunity. I, as a journalist, take the the execution in an absolutely horrific manner of Khashoggi as it should really have been the red light for any kind of dealing with Saudi Arabia, to put boycott, sanctions, etc. on Saudi Arabia and actually starve the regime financially into submission, because this kind of behaviour towards journalists is totally unacceptable, as everybody in the world can see.
And we all agree with you, Tony. Max, we only have about a minute and a half left, bud. Go ahead. Your final thoughts, please.
Well, I'll just say that I think that I do see a disagreement here between the British and the Americans as to how to rein in bin Salman, who's fallen out of favor with the U.S. political establishment since he consolidated power and succeeded his cousin, Mohammed bin Nayef. And I think that this disagreement has to do with the fact that, the UK government is led by the Tories, which have a long and storied history of lucrative arms deals with the Saudis. And I think that the Biden regime is much more concerned with conducting West with decorum and niceties that the Tories don't really seem to have much concern for. I think that the previous Obama-Biden administration, it's said by many analysts that they backed the Saudi war on Yemen to placate the Saudis who are upset over the Iran deal. And, the Saudi regime under bin Salman has become such a public relations disaster, both with Khashoggi killing and the Yemen war, where the tide of public opinion has turned against it. I think we're seeing a disagreement here between London and Washington as to how they can maintain their alliance with the Saudis while bin Salman or isolating him from diplomatic relations.
Yeah, good luck with that. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining us. It's always a serious pleasure to have both of you on and get your respective perspective on things. Tony Gosling from Bristol and Max Perry, they were joining us from New York. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review program. Thank you for dialing in, and goodbye for now.